Foreign Investment Review Board and the Treasury. I would like to commend New South Wales for their cooperation throughout this process and note the relationship between FIRB and New South Wales has been one of mutual respect and a high degree of professionalism, and I thank in particular Treasurer Gladys Berejiklian and the Premier Mike Baird, as well as the officers of the New South Wales State Treasury and on the officers of our own Treasury. I'd also like to commend the New South Wales Government for their involvement in the asset recycling process. New South Wales has been a leader in this process, which will see important investment in new infrastructure for the citizens of New South Wales. Notwithstanding my preliminary decision today, funds from the Commonwealth's Asset Recycling Initiative will continue to be available to New South Wales. We will collaborate with the New South Wales Government through the next stage of this process to ensure that the benefits of this new infrastructure investment are realised for the New South Wales community. I'm happy to take questions on these matters, but I would ask you to understand that given their sensitivity, I'm limited in what further comment I can add to what I've already outlined.
Have concerns that the Chinese may have been the census attacks had any impact?
Why don't we just stick with this matter first, and I'm happy to get to those other issues.
Do you believe some of the hurdles that you've put up will be surmountable? Can they be overcome in the next week or so?
Well, the process is for them to respond. What I've said is that the national security interests involved in this matter and this transaction as proposed to the government, that we have worked very hard and collaboratively to identify possible mitigations. And we have been unable to identify mitigations which we will believe would be suitable. Now, that has involved extensive effort. And so those issues are real. They're matters, obviously, of national security interest to the Commonwealth, and elaborating on those would obviously not be in the national interest either.
What impact could this have on Mike Baird and his budget, essentially, which rests on sale of this infrastructure?
Well, I'll leave that to the New South Wales Government to address those issues. Their advice to me is they are proceeding with these matters, and we will continue to work with them on these matters. I'm happy to stand corrected, but it's my understanding that the current New South Wales government to invest in new infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure investment in Australia is one of the critical challenges we have for our economy, and I think the leadership shown by the Baird government and Treasurer Berejiklian is exemplary, and I would encourage others to follow in their footsteps.
But isn't it a pretty big concern, though, the fact that there were no other bidders apart from how great it is they're selling assets to build infrastructure? But if there's no other buyers and you just knock back the two bidders for it, that's going to have flow-on effects.
Well, I don't accept the presumption of your question. This has been quite a long process, and many have been involved along the way. The New South Wales government...
issue moving forward?
Well, I've been Treasurer since September of last year, but the Commonwealth has been actively engaged with the New South Wales Government as they've sought to go down this path and this process. The Foreign Investment Review Board process is one that requires the consideration of all of these national interest issues, and you'd be aware that after becoming Treasurer, I appointed David Irvine, the former head of ACIS and ASIO, to sit on the Foreign Investment Review Board, as well as David Peaver, a senior executive with Rio, as well as having been involved in the first principles review of the Defence White Paper. So these are the national interest, national security issues in particular. Both of those gentlemen are not strangers to these issues. So I think having the experience of those types of people as part of the FIRB process has added to this. But when we assess these applications, and I stress we do this on every case by case, and we pursue the national security issues to the nth degree, as I said on the weekend, and that's what we've done. And that process has not enabled us to identify suitable mitigations to protect against the national security issues in this case. And that, at the end of the day, is paramount.
Chinese interests own large slabs of gas and electricity operations in other states. Why are you pulling up the drawbridge now?
Well, that is not the case. As you've suggested, what we've done is I've given a preliminary decision on this transaction for this particular asset, and it is the national security issues associated with this particular asset.
And what is it about this particular asset that you're concerned about? Why not this asset?
The only person who's security cleared in this room to be able to hear the answer to that question is me.
What kind of message do you think this decision sends to other foreign investors who may be considering investing in Australia?
That we have a robust process for examining foreign investment in Australia, that we welcome foreign investment in Australia, and we continue to do that. In 2013-14, some $160-odd billion worth of investments were approved in Australia, and we continue to approve investments where they are deemed to be not contrary to the national interest, and that is across a broad range of countries. And we will continue to actively engage with the rest of the world because foreign investment capital is important to Australian jobs. Australian jobs and Australian businesses depend significantly on the injection of foreign capital into the Australian economy. And to resist that in reasonable circumstances would cost Australian jobs. It would cost Australian wages. It would cost Australian livelihoods. And that is why we do take a positive position on foreign investment in Australia. As the evidence shows, over 100 years or more, we have done for a very long time. So we remain positively disposed towards foreign investment. It features strongly in the agreements that we've been able to agree with other countries around the world. Countries like the United States and the United Kingdom and others remain our predominant investors and holders in this country. And there are other countries who've increased their level of interest.
The Premier in New South Wales had said, obviously, this sale and linked obviously with Transgrid as well would mean better schools, better hospitals, including some in your electorate. Is this just a difficult decision or difficult preliminary decision for you to make?
Every foreign investment decision is a difficult decision. Every decision you make as a minister, whether in my experience as a Treasurer, as a Minister for Social Services, looking after $154 billion a year of payments and other support which is provided to the most vulnerable of Australians, or particularly in my role as Immigration Minister, where there are many difficult decisions. They're all difficult. But you have a clear understanding of what the national interest is in each of these cases, and I always seek to act in accordance with my understanding of that. And when it comes to foreign investment, particularly in an asset such as this, the national security issues are paramount. And I take my national security advice from those who know it best, and that is the agencies we have available to us to advise us on these matters.
Can you spell out more of those security issues? What are they?
No.
Spying? Are they
no.
Security of electricity?
I don't plan to go into those matters, and I really don't think you'd expect me to.
Were there discussions with State Grid and the other Hong Kong about what potential conditions you would put on those sales, and those conditions were deemed unacceptable by those companies, and that's why there was no acceptance of any of those bids?
No. I mean, what happens in this process is we look at the potential mitigations and potential conditions that can be put on these transactions, as we did on the Transgrid transaction. Now, we put in place conditions on the Transgrid transaction that were unprecedented, and they were strong, very strong. And we stand by those conditions. On the transactions that I consider, impose a tax deed on every decision, which if a company that is involved in one of these investments doesn't uphold the conditions of that tax deed, seeks to shift profits offshore to avoid paying tax in Australia, I can force a divestment of the sale. And that is something I've done to strengthen the expectations of the Australian government, of foreign companies, investors or others who are seeking to invest in Australia, that if you invest in Australia, if you operate in Australia, then you pay tax in Australia on what you earn in Australia, and you don't try and shift this offshore. That's why we introduced the multinational tax entity avoidance laws. That's why in the budget I outlined the new diverted profits tax to crack down on those types of multinational tax avoidance issues. So whether it's on that scale of things or otherwise, we will put conditions on transactions which we believe can ensure that transactions are not contrary to the national interest.
The Prime Minister had a discussion with Bob Catter in this very building after the election. Does this blocking have anything to do with appeasing Bob Catter, given his very vocal opposition to any potential sale of Ausgrid to Chinese investors?
No.
What's the difference between New South Wales Power Distribution Network and, say, the South Australian, which is actually owned or partly owned?
Well, again, they are issues that are germane to the national security issues that I've referred to.
These national security issues, while you can't go into it because of the clearance, have you made them clear to the bidders? Otherwise, how are they meant to find mitigating conditions?
Well, the issues of Australia's national security are only disclosed to those who are in a position to be cleared for that purpose. So I think that would contravene that.
Well, then aren't they left in the dark?
Well, Australia's national security is Australia's business, and it will always be Australia's business. And it's something that we consider internally to protect that interest.
But how can they make an acceptable mitigation?
We will always act in Australia's interest to protect Australia's national security, and that does not mean breaching that national security with others who obviously wouldn't have an expectation, let alone an entitlement to be accessing that sort of information.